yeah, so based on the survey, it looks like we have a group of people who have diverse experience in case interview preparation, and hopefully through today's events, we can know more about how to prepare for it. And when it comes to like a consulting firm interview, we are more familiar with like case interview, which case interview show us like the problem solving ability and then the business acumen. However, this interview is also as important as a case interview because it can assess like candidates' interpersonal skill set and their character and their motivation, why they really want to do this consulting position, and then why do they want to join a certain firm. So for the fees interview, different firm, they have slightly different like a term. So it can also be called like behavioral interview, and for McKinsey, it's called like personal experience interviews. But basically, it's a similar kind of formats and questions. And based on firm to firm, there will also be a different length of the fees interview. But here I put an example by using Guidehouse process. So in each round of the interview, it's usually composed of a first case interview and then a case, no matter it's in the first round or the second round. Yeah. And so here, this is a list of some common questions of these interview that might be asked during the fees interview process. So what I didn't list here is like some cultural fees questions such as why our firm, why doing a management consultant. So some other question is more asking the personal impact, and I split it into 3 different categories, such as share some experience about your teamwork and some experience that you can demonstrate your leadership. And the second category can be like achievement. What is the achievement that you have done? And then tell me a time that you achieved something outside your comfort zone, or even talk about a situation where you failed. And the third category I would say is like the impact. For example, working with someone with different opinion, and how do you deal with conflict? And you might be wondering why I label some of the questions here as blue. So this is the fees interview question, like McKinsey specifically say they would definitely ask. So they have a clear guidelines on what question they will be asking the candidates on their website. So people can go through their website more to learn about. And since we have a high level understanding of each interview, I will let Morris to take over the stage and talk about how we can prepare for it.
Okay, so happy to do that. I think Fanan asked me to talk about the STAR approach. So STAR stands for like a situation, task, action, and result. And why STAR? Because this is the industry standard to answer behavioral interview questions. And why? Because consulting, actually, some people think of consulting is about an analysis. Actually, based on my experience, consulting is all about communication. And people like to hear a good story. And nothing better than tell them a good story to make them remember you. And STAR is the simplest way to tell that story. Okay, but also you need to keep in mind, the story is just a tool. Your answer is all about, this is a behavioral interview, right? So your answer is all about to tell people about your personality. So you need to have a take-home message inside your story, try to help them remember you, because they won't remember every single detail. They will just remember how you make them feel. And that's the take-home message. So when you prepare your story, no matter your greatest achievement or your biggest failure or how people you work with, what's the take-home message? What like a personality you want to demonstrate? And of course, then you need to tailor your content based on your audience, right? Some audience, can be easily scared by some terminologies. You don't want to do that. So I can give you some example. I can show you like what is how easily we can ruin a good story, and what is at least in my experience, the best way to tell a story. So can we move to the next slide? Okay, so I'm just gonna give you an example. Like, if people ask me, like, tell me about your biggest achievement, right? I can show you how can I draw in this story. Okay, I will start to talk about my PhD research is about IMQC, which is intermolecular multiple quantum coherencies in the magnetic resonance, nuclear magnetic resonance. Okay, and also like, IMQC is very hard to be detected, very hard to be observed. But my professor Warren, he established this field back to 1993, and showing the dipolar field between like distant like spins can be easily restored by applying a symmetric gradient. I'm pretty sure now I'll be losing you, right? Because it doesn't make any sense to you. And I will keep going, right? Until like when I joined this lab, I noticed there is in a certain situation, if I apply two symmetric gradients, and then can change the signal. But based on his theory back to 1993, the symmetric gradient is irrelevant to IMQC signal. All right. So I'm pretty sure if you're in the same field like I was, you will understand what I'm talking about. But unfortunately, right, if you are a consulting manager or a partner, most of them, they don't know nonlinear physics. And I'm already on my way to the cliff. I'm about to jump. Then I started saying like, okay, I started digging more, and then realized Warren's theory actually is based on a paper published in like 1979. And in the paper of 1979, there's an equation was oversimplified. So the solution, the analytical solution, back to the based on their paper was like somehow like a biased and not that correct. So I correct the mathematical framework. That's my biggest achievement. I'm pretty sure after that, you still don't know what I'm trying to say. All right. This is a typical, like, I'll say, PhD student can ruin their good story. And that's actually the answer I gave in the very beginning of my interview, I'll say, process, when I start to get like rejected. Okay, then let's give STAR a try. Let me try to retell the story, use the STAR approach, and try to tailor that for different audience. So next slide. So I will start with the situation. All right. So I will start say like this. It was the 5th year of my PhD study. I spent more than 2.5 years working on a topic my advisor gave me. He was very, very optimistic about that, task. However, all the result I got just proved he was wrong. And I was frustrated. He was also disappointed. And he doesn't want to give me anything more for my dissertation. And I need a topic, I need a good result, I need a good results to get out there to get my PhD. That's the situation. All right. And the task, like that time I tried to find something to do, right? And I remember there's an interesting phenomena I observed in the beginning of my PhD study. Right. I was trying to optimize some MRI signal. Remember, I don't say AMI, I say MRI because MRI is more people know AMR, no MRI than AMR, right? When I made a minor change to the experimental setting, the signal was dramatically improved. However, based on everybody know about theory, that change is relevant because all the theory tell you that, that change makes no difference. And by the way, that theory actually was like established by my advisor, right? So he published that, he published like a 5 to 6 paper on Science journal, like about that topic. So I brought that to him, and he basically told me like this won't work. This is nothing worth to think more because based on all the theory we know, it's not a situation. Okay, then let's talk about action. Right, and the action is like, yes, I believe in myself. So I kept bringing him, more evidence to show him, and try to ask him to think for me if there's any theoretical explanation. However, he kept turning me down, right? And there's one time he even told me like, bring me something else, it won't work, right? And I realized that I just cannot just bring him, the evidence. I need to also bring him the theoretical explanation myself, ask him to validate. That may be the better way. So that's the reason I started getting into, the 30-something years old theory and realize there's a mistake in the equation. I derived that. And there's one day I was taking a shower, I keep thinking, try to, struggling with the math. Then that was like a light bulb moment. I got it. I figure out there's like a missing piece of that theory. Then let's go to result. So the result is like the next morning I went to him, asked him to calm down, give me 10 minutes so I can explain to him. And after 10 minutes later, he murmured like, it works. And 6 months later, I graduated, very proudly. And then also my discovery was all even highlighted by the physics today. So I can show you like same story. But with the STAR method, with more tailored, I'll say content, I think can resonate with the outsider more, which very much will be like your interviewer. So if you are working on any, I will say system biology or something like a cancer biology, very fancy, you want to tell them about your research story. It can be a good story, but you need to change the way you talk. And that's the reason we need to practice STAR. I'm gonna pause here. Should we ask like any questions or?
Sure. If anyone has any questions, feel free to ask right now, or else we will split people into breakouts room. Feel free to unmute yourself if you have questions. Fayez?
Hey, no, I don't have a question. I was just giving a thumbs up.
Okay, okay, great. Okay, so I will just split people into breakouts room.
Cool. So I just wanted to quickly talk about sort of what some of the things that you should keep in mind and to give you some guidance on prep. In terms of how to prepare, the biggest thing on how to prepare is to prepare, because for fit interviews, people generally overlook it. And I was mentioning this in my group. A lot of people put a lot of emphasis on case interview practice. And what I usually recommend to people is when you have a case partner, ask them to ask you 1 or 2 case interview questions before they then dive into the case. This gives you opportunity to practice your responses, even if they're questions that you've heard before. You'd be surprised how many different iterations through an answer to a question you go through. But it also mimics the flow of a typical interview, because usually those interviews will begin with, tell me about yourself. Why do you want to do consulting? Why are you going to join our firm? Let me ask you some questions about teamwork. Okay, thanks for your responses. Now I'd like to take some time to jump into a case. And mimicking that flow not only helps you be more confident and familiar with the day when you do your interviews, but it gives you more attempts at answering fit interview questions and coming up with ideas for what those questions are going to be. As far as fit interviews specifically, preparing on your own, the biggest things you should think about are I guess a list of stories that are going to be interesting and a list of stories that answer. So just go to Google and you can find websites that will list, the top 5 most commonly asked fit interview questions. And then there's other lists that have upwards of 50 to 100 questions, which is why I would say it's not pertinent for you to prepare for every possible question, because it's just not possible. But really take some time to look through some of those lists, start to get an idea of the types of themes that are going to be asked through a fit interview, and then start to reflect back on some of the experiences that you have and think about, okay, if they ask me a question about teamwork, here are 2 roles that I had where I worked in a team. Let me see what examples I have from those experiences that can demonstrate when I worked on a team with diversity, when I worked through a struggle with a team, when I had a conflict with a supervisor of my team. And so you can come up with different ideas of experiences, but you'll also find that when you do that, you're going to have a lot of overlap. You'll have stories that are applicable to multiple themes. You'll have stories that are applicable to multiple examples within a given theme. And giving yourself that structure, especially for any scientists on the call, we like to try and organize things. Giving yourself that structure will help make that prep more organic and more useful for you in the end. And then once you have those stories, the most important thing that you need to provide is, context and what you did. And these are the two, I was telling my group, these are the two things that people also often leave out, right? And especially, I use scientists as an example because I'm also a scientist. We understand the impact of things that we do. For example, we know how difficult it is to write a paper. We know that it takes collaborating with your boss and any other collaborators from other labs. It takes the years of work that it took to get the data, and then it takes 6 months to a year to actually get the paper published. There's revisions you have to go through. There's, editors that you have to deal with. It's a mess, right? So we understand when somebody publishes a paper, it's not a simple feat, right? But for somebody who's outside of science, when I say I published a paper, they may think, oh, well, it's like writing a newspaper article, right? Like it takes a month or two and there's some revisions and it goes out. So until you provide the context of how difficult something is, the impact of your story can very easily get lost. So when you're thinking through your experiences, really get an idea of, what is going to make this story pop? I applied for a grant. The budget of the grant over 3 years was going to be over $100,000. That provides impact for somebody, especially a consultant who works with numbers all day. Giving them that idea is going to help your footing, and it's going to help make your story more memorable and more impactful. The other thing, like I said, is very important is when you're giving your responses to these questions, really put emphasis on what you did. We commonly fall into this pitfall of, oh, well, I worked on a team with my consulting club. We were doing a pro bono project for a client. We had an issue where the client hadn't disclosed a lawsuit that they had. So we worked together to find a time to discuss the matter more about, like, it's fine, but it doesn't actually say what you did, right? And so if your role in that project was the project lead, you want to adjust that and say, so I took initiative by, as soon as I heard this information, reaching out to my president of pro bono. We worked together to figure out a strategy. And then I implemented that strategy by establishing this line of communication, setting up, presentations or meetings with other people that we didn't think we would have to have meetings with. Whatever you did specifically is going to be the most important. If you keep all of those things in mind and practice them over and over and over again, either while you're doing your case practice, or honestly, the nice thing about fit interview practice is you can do it with anybody. So if you have a significant other, if you have family members, people in your lab, if you're working in a lab, you'd be surprised how many people will be willing to help you with fit interview practice. And they don't need to know anything about consulting to ask you, tell me about yourself. Why do you want to do consulting? Getting that practice in as early as possible is often overlooked, but is going to help you do really well. As far as finding partners, like I said, use whatever mechanisms you currently have to find case partners, to find people to practice fit interview questions with. If you're not already a part of it, JHGCC has a couple of mechanisms to get involved with that. If you're not already on our email list, I can put that in the chat box for you to take a look at. But we have an Excel sheet where you can put your information on and you can kind of reach out to people freely. If you're interviewing this season, especially, so if you have interviews lined up within the next couple of months, we also have a practice partner rotation that will give you a new case partner every week. And it's just a free way to find new people to work with. Outside of that, just reach out to people, see who's willing to help you with things. You'd be surprised even how many people that aren't interested in consulting can give you a case effectively and give you feedback. So other than that, I think these other points here are also very good. The third one especially, I think, I don't know, I'm one of those people that doesn't like the sound of my voice, but hearing yourself talk and really paying attention to, I forget what the exact word is for it. Basically, when you say a certain word a lot, it can get distracting and you I think they call them crutch words. Like you'll realize when you gave the response to this question, I said interestingly 4 times, and you might step back and say, well, it wasn't that interesting. Why did I say that so many times? And you'll realize it's because it's what you say in place of when you're thinking, right? So that's good. The other thing to pay attention to, especially if you're going to be doing Zoom fit interviews, it's good to record yourself, because you'll realize that, oh, I gave all the answers to my questions sitting like this. But in actuality, you're going to want to step back. You're going to want to have a feeling like, you're comfortable, because they're going to be looking for your body language. I would assume that a lot of interviews are going to start to move back to an in-person setting, but it is still really possible, especially for first round interviews, that you're going to do those over Zoom. And so you want to be very cognizant of body language, because that's going to be the last thing that you're thinking about when you're getting asked these questions. And one of the things they will pay attention to, because consultants, especially at the biggest firms, are going to be working with CEO level individuals, they need to see that you are a confident person. And if you're slouching, or when they ask you a question, you make a facial expression that's like, so good example, I had a friend who was doing fit interviews, and one of the feedbacks that she got from her fit interview was that when they asked her about a time where she had a conflict with someone, her facial expression changed to imply that she was angry. And that's something that you might not think about, but you will do. And subconsciously, they'll say, well, because you made that face, like it demonstrated that you had a breakdown in your emotions, even if you didn't display it outwardly to me. And in business, you'd be surprised how many things can be dependent on body language. And so the more you take steps to view yourself in that light, the more you'll be able to correct things that you think are going to be negative towards your representation of yourself. So overall, the moral of the story is take time to think about your experiences and really reflect on the value that you got from those experiences, and really think about how you can portray that value to someone who wasn't there. And once you have that, just practice. I mean, like I said, fit interview is the one that people are like, yeah, I can plan for that in 2 weeks. And you'd be surprised how much time you can devote to fit interview. I'd recommend, at least a couple of months of earnestly thinking about it, writing down your stories, and, practicing responses. If you're the kind of person that needs to rehearse it a couple of times to have that confidence, I would say do it that way. But other than that, I mean, I don't have any other tips at this point. I'm happy to open the floor for questions and, help you out in whatever ways I can.
Yeah, so I'm actually interested to know, do you have any tips on how to do a virtual interview? Like you mentioned, okay, we can sit back and then show we are confident and comfortable. Like, do you have other suggestions?
I mean, I think that's the biggest thing. I have gotten this feedback. I don't know if anybody's been able to pick up on this. I'm not usually the most outward with my emotions. So even when I got flustered during a case interview, or when someone asked me a question that I wasn't super comfortable asking, I commonly get feedback that I appear confident. And it's just because the way I carry myself is just very no emotions, positive or negative, which not letting out the positive can be hurtful at times. But it's really just, one, being proactive. So if you're doing your fit interview practice with a case partner, like tell them explicitly, I'm trying to work on body language. Can you take a note of the way that I'm sitting, or facial expressions that I make? You also, if you're doing that practice over Zoom, just record yourself and watch it later. Those two things are probably the biggest. Other than that, it could be useful even to almost, well, that's where the recording will be helpful. Thinking through things like, when I talk through my headphones, is what I'm saying clear? Is it muffled? Like, do I have a staticky breakup in my voice? Am I showing, because some people's cameras, like they'll get positioned so that you only see like from their chin up, and that's distracting. Some people's cameras are positioned so far out that you can see too much of their background. So I would recommend for Zoom, if you have the capability to do like background blur, or I wouldn't do a complicated background. Those are helpful. And if you don't have a computer that can do that, I actually, when I was doing my interviews in my office, took some white curtains that we had laying around the house and took a curtain rod and put it up on a couple of ladders and just stuck it behind me to just make a plain white background, because I didn't have a laptop that could do the background blur at the time. I felt that was helpful because it took away distractions, because I was doing my interviews in a craft room that had a bunch of craft mess behind me. That's the only other thing, try to eliminate distractions as much as possible.
Oh, thank you.
Any other lingering questions?
Actually, I also have another question.
Mhm.
So for different firm, like how many questions guys ask in one round of interview?
Yeah, I think a good expectation, it depends on, like you said, it depends on the firm a little bit. Usually you can count on having either a 30-minute or a 40-minute interview slot. And so if you have a 30-minute slot, you can probably expect to have 1 or 2 questions on the front end. Maybe they'll allocate 10 minutes for the fit interview portion and then 20 minutes for the case. I think a more common format is the 45-minute, because if someone's interviewing multiple candidates through the day, they'll meet with you at 9 a.m., do 45 minutes, have a 15-minute break to write comments, and then they meet with the next person. And then that format is usually a 15-minute fit and then a half an hour for the case. But that's definitely something that, in your preparation, if like once you have an interview lined up, definitely reach out to whoever your point of contact has been for that interview process, and just ask and say, if they haven't already told you, what is the breakdown for the interview, like how long is the fit portion going to be, just so that I can, you can word it in a way to like be like, oh, I want to prepare properly, like I'm just curious like how that's going to break down. That's also useful for case stuff too, because if you're interviewing with Bain, McKinsey, BCG, like it's really easy to find what their interview styles are. But especially if you interview with life science firms, they're not always very obvious about what their style is in terms of interviewer led versus interviewee led. And it's totally fair game to ask whoever your POC has been at the time to say, hey, is this an interview that I'm expected to lead myself, or are you guys going to be asking me questions? And that's helpful, because they'll say one or the other, or they might say it's actually going to be a little bit of both, just so that you're not caught off guard by the flow of the interview process.
Thank you. Yeah, I think we might call it a day since we're actually over time. So thank you everyone, and thank you Matt for being here and sharing the experience and being the coach for everyone. Yeah.
Yeah,
So
happy to help.
yeah, thank you.